Making sure this works. Nice. Hi, my name is Houston, and before I get started, I want to send a huge thank you to Orly for inviting me to be a part of the Life Vest Inside Dance for Kindness event, and I hope you all are celebrating World Kindness Week thoughtfully and well. How cool is this? If we haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Houston. It looks a lot like this. Houston like the city. My parents have never even been to Texas, but hey, that's me. Craft like the cheese. If you want to find me or follow me, whatever, at Houston Craft. My friend and I, we started this thing together called Character Strong, just like that. And this is actually my friend John and I a few years ago. We started Character Strong because we believe that practicing things like kindness actually requires a lot of teaching. Right, that we can only create a more kind world if we teach the skills that live beneath it. In fact, I've been thinking about kindness for a long time. Been speaking and working in schools for the past decade. I've spoken with like 600 schools, and around the time when I first started, like 9 years ago, I remember I was sitting on an airplane. I remember this airplane ride really well for a lot of reasons. Among them, I'd never really flown for work before, and so I had no status, which meant I was sitting in the middle seat. I don't know your feelings towards the middle seat. I call the middle seat the hot dog seat because people's buns are on either side of me. And on this particular day, I was tired. I wanted to take a nap when all of a sudden this woman shows up. Doesn't ask for me to stand up or anything. She just squeezes past me. She has a seat next to the window. And I can tell right away that this woman has more energy than I want her to. She starts taking things out of her bag. She's decorating her space. She's fidgety. She keeps trying to make eye contact. And out of the corner of my eye, I see this. I'm like, look ahead, do not engage, because I'm in no mood for a conversation. And sure enough, I get a tap on my shoulder. I take out my headphone. I'm like, yeah, you need something? She goes, hi, I'm Helga. I'm like, here we go. And sure enough, she starts diving in. She asked me all kinds of questions. And at some point, she asked me what I did for work. I told her I worked in schools. She goes, Houston, I used to work in a school. I was like, cool. She goes, Houston, I used to work at a high school. What was your favorite part? What did you love about high school? I was like, probably my senior year. She goes, why? I'm like, all right, we're gonna do this. And I explained to her, this is actually true. The high school I went to, my friends and I, my senior year, we got together and we started this club called Random Acts of Kindness, etc. RAKE, we called it Rake for short. We had a big wooden garden rake. That was our mascot. And once a week, we got together to practice kindness. That was kind of the whole point of the club, was to protect time on a weekly basis for this practice of this thing that we knew we wanted more of in our school and in the world. There's only 2 rules to the club. Rule number 1, you had to meet someone new. Go into the school, try to find someone you hadn't talked to before. I went to a big school, like 1,800 kids. We did the math. Even if I met someone new at my school every single day, all 4 years of high school, I still wouldn't meet all the people I show up to the same building with daily. So we thought to ourselves, at least once a week, meet someone new. Rule number 2, leave them better than you found them. Those were most of the conversations we had at the club. What does it mean to actually leave someone better than you found them? How do we do that thoughtfully and intentionally and effectively? And I'm telling Helga this whole story. I look over, she's crying. She goes, Houston, that is so important. I was like, yeah, no, it's great. We met a lot of cool people. We had a lot of awkward interactions. We weren't very good at meeting new people. She goes, no, you don't understand how important that is to me. I said, well, you're probably going to tell me. And sure enough, she launches into the story about how the last time she was on an airplane was 3 years before her and I ever met. She goes, Houston, the only reason I was on an airplane the last time I was because early in the morning I woke up to a phone call from my dad's doctor. Helga lives in Seattle, Washington. Her dad in Phoenix, Arizona. She goes, Houston, I woke up to this phone call saying, Helga, I don't know where you're at right now, but the sooner you can get to Arizona, the better. We're taking your dad to the hospital. We're not exactly sure what's going on, but he's not doing real well, and I'm sure he would love to see you. She goes, Houston, I didn't even pack a bag. I sped to the airport. I bought a really expensive plane ticket for 5 hours later that night. She goes, I had to wait in that airport all day until finally I sit down on my plane. I take my phone out to turn it off, to turn it on to airplane mode. And right as I'm about to turn my phone off, I get another phone call from my dad's doctor explaining that my dad had passed away. Houston, I'm on my way to go and see him when I learned that I lost him. Can you imagine? She She said, Houston, you know, I sat next to strangers for 3 hours after getting the worst news of my life. I sat there in silence. She goes, I think I was in shock until finally we landed in Arizona. She goes, I got off the plane, I walked up to the nearest wall, and I just crumbled. I put my head in my hands, and I cried harder than I've ever cried in my whole life. And to Helga's credit, she's got a good sense of humor. She goes, Houston, you should know something about me. I'm not a pretty crier. I'm not a quiet crier. She goes, I sound like Chewbacca is choking on something. That is a visual that is stuck in my head. She goes, it is loud and it is aggressive. She goes, you want to know why what you're talking about is so important to me? Kindness. She goes, I sat in the airport that day for 2 hours, crying on the worst day of my life. And if I had to guess, over the course of that 2 hours, there were probably 3,000 people in that airport around me, going to their planes or getting off their planes. Houston, 2 hours, 3,000 people. Not one. Not a single person stopped. She goes, you have no idea how much I could have used an act of kindness that day. 9 years later, at this point in my life, I think about or talk about Helga almost every day. I don't even know her last name. I've never seen Helga again. I just think about that story often as I think about my own capacity for compassion in my life. That story for me, I don't know how you react, but for me, it's self-confrontational. Every time I tell it or think about it, it forces me to ask myself the question, would I stop? And what frustrates me about myself is, like, 9 times out of 10, I feel like the answer is no. And I care about kindness. I believe in kindness. I think what frustrates me more on a cultural level is if you were to ask any of the 3,000 people that walked by Helga that day, if you were to ask them the question, do you believe in kindness? I think all 3,000 would tell you, of course. So there's a gap. There's a gap between what we believe in and what we do for each other, what we say is good and what we're actually good at. You know, Harvard calls it the rhetoric reality gap. They ask families to rank for their kids. Hey, what do you want most for your children? For them to be high performing, happy, or kind? 1, 2, and 3, rank them. 80-something% of families said, I want my kids to be happy and kind over high performing. That feels like good news, but they asked the kids of those same parents, hey, what do you think your parents want you to be, high performing, happy, or kind? And the data was the exact opposite. Kids say that their parents want them to get good grades over being good people. Harvard calls it the rhetoric reality gap, that gap between what we say is worthwhile and what we actually do. Why? That was a combination of where and why. Why does that gap exist? And over the past 10 years, I have been thinking about that question from all different sorts of angles. Why do we have that gap? Today, the short amount of time we have, I want to talk about 2 main things. The first one is language. I think the way we speak about things is indicative of how we're going to treat them. Because the way we wield language, the way we think about something in our brain shapes the way we act with it in the world. And having worked with 600 schools, I see all kinds of posters and mottos and acronyms about kindness. Just about any school I've ever been to asks of their students, asks of their people to be kind. But the way they talk about it, I think, is just as important of how much we talk about it. The posters I see are things like throw kindness around like confetti, sprinkle that stuff everywhere. And talking with adults and young people alike, they say kindness is free. Why aren't people more kind? And I feel like it's one of the most damaging narratives we have in our world around kindness. This idea that kindness is free. Throw kindness around like confetti. I really believe that if kindness was as simple or as easy as tossing confetti around, the world would be a much more kind place. In fact, I literally wrote a whole book about it called Deep Kindness. It just came out. And I wanted it to be a revolutionary way for the way that we think and talk about kindness, because the way we talk about things is going to show how we act with that thing. And I think if we believe that kindness is free, then for some reasons, part of us that's human doesn't want to value it or allocate the necessary resources to improve at it. We have to speak about kindness in a way that honors how hard it is. We have to recognize that the kind of kindness the world presently needs is one that is intentional, that listens well in order to love each other better, that has a lot of empathy, that is rooted in perspective taking. It requires sacrifice. It costs us something, comfort or convenience or ego or pride, in order to act in the sort of kindness the world presently needs. Not confetti kindness, Not the kind when it's convenient or easy for us, not with the people that we already agree with or already like. As my friend and mentor Tyler Durman says, a commitment to growth is a commitment to pain, which means if we're ever going to get better collectively and individually at kindness, we have to think about it and practice it when it challenges us the most. That second part, the second thing I want to talk about is just time. I feel like we are more busy than we have ever been. Our culture measures success based on how much we get done. Productivity feels like the number one pathway towards lovability. I literally got this tattooed on my arm, be is greater than do, to remind me that I'm a human being and not a human doing, that my worthiness is not wrapped up in what I get done, but how I be in the world every single day. To give you a practical strategy, one that's helped me, what if every single day when you write down your to-do list, which by the way, I think all of us have these, and they seem like they are forever long. I don't think we ever formally get done with this. We always have something to do, and I think over time we've grown accustomed to this, attached to this. I think we love getting things done because it's what our world has told us is successful. So sometimes we'll write down things we've already done just for the satisfaction of checking them off. But here's the deal, our to-do list is usually concrete, right? We know how to catch up on emails. We know how to put away the laundry. We know how to submit the report for Q2 expenses or whatever the thing is. But what if above our to-do list, sorry, we got airplanes flying around. What if above our to-do list, we wrote out a to-be list? A practical list of those abstract ideas that we know we want to be about. But if you're anything like me, I want to be kind, I want to be grateful, I want to be present. But they're so abstract, they're not as check-offable, so naturally they fall to the bottom of the list. They're too abstract, and if we don't make them actionable, if we don't visually and philosophically prioritize them in our life, well, guess what? We never get to them. So the strategy is this. On your to-do list tomorrow, write out a 1 or 2 item to-be list. And next to that to-be item, maybe it's kind. Write out a 5 or 10 minute practice that you can actually check off. Will Durant says we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. As my friend Dexter Davis says, we're not human beings, we're human becomings. It is a process that requires consistency and practice over time. I'm in the hot dog seat. Helga looks at me, she goes, Houston, 2 hours, 3,000 people, not one person stopped. I'll never forget what she said next. She goes, you know what I realized that day in the airport, Houston, as 3,000 people walked by me? I realized that kindness isn't normal. That it's not normal in our world to be kind. And ever since that day, I've been trying to figure out how we change that. How we close that gap between what we say is good and what we are actually good at. If there's 2 things for you to start doing today, the first one, change the way we speak about it. Kindness is not free. What if the poster that I grew up with, what if the poster that existed in schools today said this, throw kindness around like it's the most important and meaningful resource we have? What if every single day I didn't wait until I had time to practice kindness? What if I made time? I put it on that list and put as much value and practice and consistency behind it as I did everything else that I have to get done. I think the only way that we make kindness normal in this world is to do the challenging and uncomfortable work of making kindness normal in my life every single day. Let's celebrate this World Kindness Week by moving beyond a week, by building it into our schedules, by measuring it as a metric of our personal success. And making kindness normal is about time.